All right, should we kick off that recording, Linda? Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. Thank you for joining. So, bit of a my name is Greg Taylor. I'm the PM turning off Basic Auth in Exchange Online for everyone. So you have me to thank if you have lots of additional work and trouble, but I'm happy to try and answer as many questions as you can. I'm joined by certainly at least Rob Whaley that I work with. There may be some other Microsoft folks or some other MVPs who know this subject pretty well too. And I'm very happy to answer any kind of questions you've got really regarding the whole Basic Auth thing. Hopefully, if you've sat and already listened through to the presentation that we did yesterday, hopefully a lot of where we are at and how we've approached the project and where we're going should all be pretty clear, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Bless you. Happy to answer any questions you might have. I just got muted. Talk through some of the other parts of the presentation again, dig into any detail if you want. So does anyone feel like daring to put their hand up and come up with a question, or should we sit quietly in a library and hope somebody dares? You can either pop your hand up or ask a question in chat. I'm happy to try and answer either. If not, I'll dig into some I'll try and dig around and tell some stories. Great, we have a question. Hey, Eric.
Yes, sir. I've got a pretty, I hope, straightforward question. We, in my organization, we are in a hybrid environment, but all of our mailboxes reside on-prem.
Okay.
How does Basic Auth deprecation and Exchange Online impact us?
Well, on the face of it, it really shouldn't.
Okay.
Given that we are not turning off anything in Exchange on-prem, I would say it shouldn't affect you in any way. Having Basic Auth enabled on-prem, unless you pretty much control and restrict it in some other ways, is challenging and problematic too, right? But we don't need to get into a conversation around why Basic Auth on-prem is not a good idea. That's entirely your call. But I would say, Eric, it probably wouldn't affect you at all.
Okay, it's not going to affect any kind of credential access for our Office 365 licensing?
No, and bear in mind, so I would say on the face of it, no, right? There's a couple of things I would do to double check. So first of all, we're only turning off Basic Auth for Exchange Online protocols. So I often get the question like, how does this affect SharePoint? And the answer is, it doesn't, or we would have said this is turning off Basic Auth in Exchange and SharePoint, which we're not. We're turning off Basic Auth in Exchange Online. So if it's not Exchange Online, it's probably not a part of it. One thing I would suggest you do, though, to be sure, is have a look in Azure AD sign-in reports. Do there's articles from our sort of Basic Auth main page. Really, there are some guides on how you can use Azure AD sign-in reports to see what Basic Auth usage you've got in your tenant. And one would assume if your mailboxes are on-prem, if you go and look in your Azure AD sign-in reports, you won't see any traffic. And if that's the case, using Legacy Auth, you're good to go.
Okay. I will throw a caveat at you. We have been testing moving mailboxes to the cloud, specifically our in-place archive mailboxes. Does that have any impact on connecting to those?
So in my experience, and if any other Microsoft folks have a different answer, the operation to move data from on-prem to cloud is actually a pull operation from the cloud reaching into on-prem and pulling the data, which means the connection, if it were to use Basic Auth, is against your on-prem environment, not against the cloud.
Okay.
Now, of course, if you use some third-party migration toolset that you wanted to try and move data from on-prem to cloud, perhaps some third-party toolset is going to go and connect to the cloud using Basic Auth credentials. and push data into the cloud. But I think if you go look in Azure AD Signer reports, I'd have a look there and sort of validate whether you see any sign of traffic at all. That would be my suggestion.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Look, another Eric. Your name has to be Eric if you want to ask a question today, it turns out. So Eric, go for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thanks, Greg, long-time fan. I've actually got two questions. So one, yesterday in your session, you mentioned Microsoft has worked with Apple to facilitate the auto upgrade from their
Yes.
native client. And I actually talked to one of our customers who has an issue, i.e. they have iPhones and they're currently using ActiveSync and they have no idea why, as in they thought they were good to go. They were very surprised. We pinged them and said, look, you have an issue starting October 1st.
Right.
And we drilled down and found they didn't do the Apple Internet Account Enterprise app on their Azure AD.
Okay.
So my question now becomes, if we enable that, how long in your experience would it take for, let's say, about 200 devices to auto upgrade? And is there anything we can do to speed up that process?
Good questions. Right. So, sorry, get in my throat. There's a few factors here, and and I'm going to jump forward in the slide deck because when presenting yesterday, as usual with me, I rambled way too much to the beginning and I didn't get to a slide at the back. Right. So I'm going to jump forward to this, and so this was kind of what I was talking a bit about yesterday in the process. Right now, the other slide I didn't show yesterday was this one. Because I didn't really have time, right? So let me just walk through it now. In itself, the app consent, the admin app consent, it's not the only factor at play here, all right? But app consent more broadly plays a part. So here's basically kind of a choice of flow. So when the device here, let me get my laser pointer going. When the code kicks in, and I'll tell you now, the code kicks in. It's not on the blog. I'm sure it'll be on Twitter soon. It's about every 10 days. After the point where the device is first upgraded, and then on a timer of about every 10 days, the device will attempt to do an auto migration. So in answer to your question there, Eric, about 10 days. Okay. So
thanks.
The device will attempt to do the ROPC migration. And there's a few states. These are the three blocks here. There are a few states that the tenant configuration might be in that will either make this much harder or much easier. So the first state will be that the tenant admin has told it to block consent requests. I do not allow any user to request consent for any app other than the ones I've put in the list. That's a hard fail. Device will be stuck at that stage, right? When we turn on, if memory serves, I think it will keep using Basic. It will simply fail to auto migrate, and when we block Basic, the device will be cut off. Another configuration option you have in Azure, which is that the user can request consent. So you've probably seen that form pop up sometimes. You may or may not have seen it where you don't have permission to consent to the app, but you can ask your admin if you can be granted consent. That triggers an email to the admin. The admin has to go and grant consent. Now, of course, the device won't immediately then change. It's going to take another cycle of about 10 days for that to happen. Best case scenario is either the admin allows the users to consent or they've granted admin consent, in which case then the user can consent to the app. If they're an admin, they also get that checkbox that says, and allow me to consent on behalf of my organization. In other words, do the admin consent right here and now. And then the user will be pushed through this flow. Now, there are a number of reasons as well why the device won't automatically migrate. And so what I'm saying, Eric, so just back to that one. So admin consent or the lack of in itself isn't necessarily it. It could, I would check, has consent been blocked? Or is admin consent allowed but requested, or can users just consent? Now, if it's still not working, it could be something else. And so the most typical one is the device is managed. And and that's either Intune or AirWatch, or even if you get the devices through Apple directly. Apple have a Apple have a service where they can pre-configure devices and put profiles on them to help larger customers with deployment. Those will prevent the ROPC flow from working too. The basic mobility. I'm actually having a bit of an email thread with the team about that. We know there's a number of tenants that are using M365 basic mobility and security, and those admins need to take action too. So there's a number of reasons why the device might not automatically migrate, and we're investigating a few. Do any of those sound like they might apply in your case?
They absolutely. So, like I said, first of all, the Apple Internet Accounts Enterprise app isn't present in the tenant today, so that needs to be done.
Certainly helps things. Yes, for sure.
I know. Yes, they haven't done it, and we've pinged that as being the root cause of why they're still on ActiveSync. Secondly, they've got their tenant open, i.e., they allow users to accept consent. However, one of the first things I would do from a security standpoint would to disallow that because it's a known security issue. There's some
illicit grant consent type stuff,
yes,
right? Where people
exactly.
just agree to an app. I mean, that actually is kind of funny, but I mean, that's a real risk. I agree with you. Which, for anyone who doesn't know, that's, we condition users to, what they all like. They all click on warning messages like, do you trust this certificate? And they're like, yeah, of course I do. I want to get to my email. And in the
Are
case
you sure
of
you want to delete this? Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, do you want to grant permissions to this app? And this is the dialogue, this one, I'm sort of, sorry, just going to laser point this one, where, they download some rogue app.
Yeah.
And the rogue app says, hey, I want permission to access absolutely everything. And of course, they installed it. They went, yeah, sure, accept. And that's
it's
dangerous.
The main attack vector currently, besides MFA spamming, right?
Very good. Okay.
So besides that, we're going to turn that off for them because we don't feel that is appropriate for that tenant. However, we are going to grant admin consent for the Apple Internet Accounts Enterprise app. So that should take care of the issue, and then we are stuck with, we've got a little bit, some small window for the deadline to pop up, and hopefully they'll make it within the 10 days. And the last part would be, we can handle those devices manually, or we could have the end user do it and basically re-roll their accounts on the device, do it themselves, or we do it. So we can get around it. However, it would have been it would be nice if the interval was a bit quicker. Doesn't help us right now, but it would have been nice.
Agreed.
So I know what we have to do. So thank you very much for your answer. Second question, and this is going to be painful. Sorry, Greg. I heard you mention yesterday you have granted respite to a certain number of organizations. I have a different customer who may want to apply for that. How would we go about doing that? Do we contact you directly? Or kidding, but should we go through the TAM? Or
you mean beyond December, right? So
yeah, exactly, beyond December.
So all the customers that got a little more time other than that, they had a message in their message sender post already. If they did not get one of those, there is no option for them.
Yeah, right. Okay, so yeah, all right. So we've been working with them since January. They have just now realized that they're in trouble. I.e., they're working with another partner on an app that is not going to be ready, most likely. So we've said to them, well, yeah, either take the pain after December or do something else. And I just wanted to say, get where the options are.
Yeah, well, in short, there are none. We will turn them off in January, right? So, but let me. So
it's a clear answer.
Yeah, I aim to give as clear an answer as I can, but let me give you a few things that. So I talk to a lot of customers, and I find generally things. There are a few commonalities. So let me just share those to see if they help, and then I see we've got some questions in chat too, which are brilliant, right? So, things like ActiveSync. Take ActiveSync, right? If we turn off Basic Auth, if users are on Android devices, there's a good chance, or even if they're on iOS devices, if they're not, if they're, those devices can all be reconfigured. generally, right? So as long as anyone is not trying to use their iPhone 4, they can remove the account from the phone and they can add it back. Obviously, you don't wait until they've been cut off before you email them those directions because they might not turn up. But if you tell them, this is how you get your mobile device working again, do that. This is also a good opportunity for customers who want to create some kind of standard rather than a bring your own device free for all, which many customers have. Many customers don't want to do that. So they standardize at that stage. And they're like, the only apps we will now allow from this date are going to be Outlook Mobile or the Gmail app or the native mail app on iPhone. And they blame me and what we're doing here as we're creating a policy, and it's Greg's fault. So with mobile devices, and if you have an MDM, of course, you use the MDM to push a new profile. None of this magic we've done or this work we did with Apple here is going to help if you have an MDM. And the design principle behind that was pretty clear, right? Which is if you've used an MDM to push a profile to a device set with settings, who are we to go and mess around with that? Use the MDM. So on ActiveSync, it's pretty straightforward. With Outlook for Windows, it's either upgrade the version of Outlook for Windows or make sure the OAuth 2 client profile enable flag in the tenant is set to true. And as I think I mentioned in the earlier session, I'm turning it on for customers already. There aren't that many that I haven't touched yet. And they're the bigger customers. I'm going to leave it. But when we get to October and I block Basic Auth for Outlook, I will turn on Modern Auth for Outlook. And it will be done. And it's a one-time switch for the tenant. So Outlook isn't that much of a problem for most customers. Just keep Outlook up to date. It's easy.
And ours is currently on EWS. EWS is where their issue is. They're hooking into the mailbox directly through EWS, which is where their issue is.
So these are apps. So that's where I get into. Then it gets more tricky, right? Then it's EWS-based apps that are using Basic Auth or POP or IMAP or PowerShell too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of those require a little bit of, potentially a little bit of development work to change the auth type. And so I get that can take a while, right? But it's not as though we're changing from EWS to Graph. You can. It's a bit late in the day to be doing that right now, but you certainly can keep the protocol EWS in itself, but the authentication type is what changes. And so, and then of course, depending on the app, you have the whole question of how you roll it out and, how do people get access to it. But with a lot of the customers I talk to as well, and it's interesting to say that, but they focus very much on ActiveSync and Outlook as being like, oh my goodness, this is going to be disastrous. And I try and bring their attention to the EWS-based apps and the POP and IMAP apps that are being used that are probably critical business process type apps that need to be remediated. And if you don't own the code and it's owned by a third party, you need to go to a third party and find out what's going on. I look at customers' data all the time, and often I can just run a report, and my immediate question is, do you use Cisco Unity? Oh, yeah, we do, don't we? Yeah, well, Cisco Unity is going to stop working in October. Now, Cisco have an update. The larger the company, the slower it will be to implement that update. We all know how that works, right? But there are, assuming these are, mainstream applications, many of the vendors have solutions. So, but I guess my uber point there is the end users interrupting their email for a bit. For most customers, the user needs to go do something. They can work around it. It's the line of business apps that bother me a bit.
Yeah, and that's what's going on here. They're most of their workflows are in hooking into mailboxes that go into the application at the back end, and that's what's going on here. So So I'll have a look at their message center and see what it says and go from there.
Yeah, and then ping me direct if you want to have we can have a look at their tenant and their usage and see if we can make any other recommendations. But
I'll go through their TAM because I think if I'll contact you directly, he'll kill me.
Yeah, no, do that. Go through their account manager and stuff, and have them reach out, and I'll tell them the same answer, but it can come through their account team perhaps rather than you, which is fine.
Yeah, that's
I've
great.
developed a fairly thick skin through this process. But as my final slide yesterday did say, no more delays or extensions. This time we mean it. Okay.
I think you said that in 2021.
Well, there was a pandemic.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Okay. Thanks very much for your time, Greg.
But hey, welcome anytime. If anyone else called Eric has a question, in fact, Eric in the chat there is like, Eric, Cisco Unity, you have an issue that you can't upgrade. No voicemails for you.
Yeah, our Cisco Unity version is so old that it's end of life, and we would have to buy a whole new system. I've told them that it's just not gonna, they're just not gonna get their voicemail and email anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I can only do what I can do. It's an old different
No,
department that owns that out.
and you know, it was interesting. I mentioned yesterday as well, you know, when we did the turning stuff off for 48 hours, right, which I was interested, nobody's really been, I know at the time, you know, certainly we caused a few temperatures to raise. Where's this? Here you go, this slide, right? And I know we interrupted business for a number of particularly small customers, and I apologize. You know, I'm sorry that there were some that had a bit of an interruption, and I hope rather than just be annoyed, re-enable the protocol and carry on, they realize that we're going to turn it off again, and it will be staying off and interrupting them. They're the one. So, you know, but my point was going to be was that that for many of these customers that we turn things off for, it turns out they didn't notice. Now, whether that's because a lot of the usage we see is not real usage, which in fact brings me to a point I want to make, because I had a conversation with a customer this morning, right? Which I think is actually also relevant to Raghu Ram's question I'll answer in a second on chat, right? Which is that a lot of the usage might not actually be legitimate. I can't actually see when I look at the basic auth usage for your tenant how legitimate it is. I just see people logging in. And the problem is, a lot of that usage that I'm looking at and sending you message sender posts about is probably already a sign of breach. You probably, you know, you might already have somebody who has a username and password and they're already accessing your tenant using Basic Auth. Of course, I can't tell that, not directly. I sort of, you know, and I touched on this point a little bit yesterday. I can sort of see it indirectly when I look at this kind of behavior. I'll just jump back to another slide. When I look at this kind of behavior, right, where I look and I see patterns where I see, you know, for example, with IMAP, I see hundreds of logins a month. And these are, you know, there's your various line of business apps that are still using IMAP. And then I see this. One user logged in once in 30 days using IMAP. Dodgy. And so, you know, I would send you a message center post in your tenant saying, I saw 6 users in the month of August, let's just say, using IMAP. But I can't tell this legitimate app from this password spray success, right? Now, Eric, are we good on that? So I'm going to try and answer one of the questions in the chat there about authentication policies and how we secure stuff. Because if I may, I'll quickly try and answer this. So in answer to your question, Raghu, do we evaluate authentication policy on every request? Yes, we do. And authentication policies are scoped to group. How long do authentication be? So you don't scope into group, you scope. Anyone?
I think we lost your audio, Rick.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Okay, I had a temporary power cut there. Everything just went off. Okay, I'll try and talk quicker. Sorry. All right, are we good? Are we back? Authentication policies, where was I? Authentication policies evaluated on every request, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, just remind me, where was I? I was going with that. I just got slightly distracted. The other way customers try and block access to stuff is using setcas mailbox. I think I mentioned this briefly yesterday, but as I probably also, I think I should have mentioned yesterday as well, setcas mailbox is evaluated at step 5. Essentially, we've authenticated the user, they've passed conditional access, everything's great. Finally, we get back and we say, okay, does Exchange allow them access to the protocol? And the answer is no. Now, what's a slide I quickly threw together this morning is the problem is with blocking with setcas mailbox is it does not defend you against a password spray at all. If you only block, if you think blocking POP and IMAP and everything with setcas mailbox means you are protecting yourself, you're not. Because you get a different error back in a client when you block auth policy or setcas mailbox. So if you block with an auth policy, or if you have a bad password, basically the same message comes back, no login failed. If you block with setcas mailbox, look what you get back. User is authenticated, but not connected. Which essentially is code for saying, good job, you got the password right, but we're not going to give you access to the mailbox. That's what that is. So then what happens is the attacker then takes those credentials, says, okay, I can't get access to the mailbox via IMAP, but let me try those credentials against any other resource secured by Basic Auth. And away you go. So it's very interesting when you sort of, I just want you to, there are many people who think, how am I going to block Basic Auth? The way to do it is with an auth policy. And the way I generally recommend customers do this is say, all right, how long will it take to take effect on an auth policy? About, I think it actually says it on the site, on the page for blocking Basic Auth. It tells you how long it takes, Raghu, and it tells you how you can force it. All right, and I think it's a matter of half an hour tops, right? So typically what I see a lot of larger customers doing right now is they say, okay, I know we're coming towards October. I know I've got a bunch of IMAP usage and a bunch of POP and a bunch of, active sync, let's just say. They then create a authentication policy for allow Basic Auth for IMAP, and they assign it to the accounts they know use IMAP. They create a policy called allow Basic Auth for POP, and they assign it to the accounts they know are legitimately using POP, and so on. And then they create a default authentication policy for the tenant, blocking Basic Auth for everything else. Or they go in the admin center and just uncheck the boxes under modern auth, okay? And then what that succeeds in doing is, unless your name is on the guest list for the particular protocol you're trying to access, you are turfed away at step 1. You are not allowed to use Basic Auth for that protocol. Get lost. Bad username or password is the response the user, the connection gets. And so they can't tell whether the username was right or wrong, or the password was right or wrong. They just get told, blocked by policy, bad username or password, they'll see. And then what you're doing essentially is saying, these 5 accounts are allowed to use IMAP. Everybody else will be denied. So suddenly your logs will clear up, as will mine, right? All of these, all of these things you'll see. But I would see Basic Auth blocked in the view I get. You would see a lot less. I spoke to a customer this morning whose bad passwords and repeated bad passwords were 5 times greater than their login successes every day. They have more people sending bad passwords than they do successful passwords. But very few account not provisioned. And account not provisioned in this case means I didn't know who the username was. So basically that customer is seeing lots of correct usernames and many, many, many bad passwords, which could be an indication that somebody has their directory. They know all the valid usernames because they're their email addresses, and now they're just systematically trying the passwords. And they're using setcas mailbox to do the blocking, which means when the attacker incorrectly gets when they correctly get the password, they're going to get this response. So they know they got a correct password, then they carry on. Okay, I hope that's, you're welcome, Raghu. There you go, there's your answer. Sorry, I know I'm a bit of a soapbox. I didn't have a chance to really get into this yesterday, but hopefully that is helpful for some of you. Does anyone else want to pop their hand up and ask a question that's in chat? Because sorry, I wasn't quite reading the chat. I can answer, Stefan. Do we know when Basic Auth for SharePoint will be shut down? No. There is no date I'm aware of. Not sure what their plan is. Jamie, go for it.
Yeah, I posted up earlier in the chat about using conditional access to block basic auth.
Right.
I'm trying to scroll up into the chat to find exactly
I see it.
where I'm at there. Yeah, so we tried to go a little bit more all-encompassing with it by using the conditional access policy. We just blocked everything legacy as far as the legacy apps, SMTP, POP, IMAP, et cetera.
Right.
And we created an exclusion list for those accounts that we know use basic authentication and that are actively working through the code. And as a result, we're seeing legacy apps that are using, for example, POP with OAuth 2.0 that are being blocked by the policy, which again is expected because they're using a legacy app. So my question is, it's not a huge problem. We're just adding those folks and documenting them and adding them to our exclusion group. After 10.1, the expectation is using POP with OAuth 2.0, you're going to be just fine.
Yes.
But in the meantime, we're trying to suss out people that haven't answered our call to update their code. So is there an easy way to exclude the OAuth 2.0 folks using conditional access? I have a feeling the answer is probably no, but I'm curious from your viewpoint.
Well, I'd say the answer is to use authentication. So let me just repeat. So you want to allow them to use POP and OAuth, right? But not use. But if you use conditional access to block legacy, it blocks them too, right?
Yeah. It doesn't give you the flexibility to choose that, right?
So then I would come back to what I have on screen here and use authentication policies, because then what you could do is say,
okay,
set CAS mailbox. Create an authentication policy that says, allow basic auth for POP false, right? Which will make sure they can't use basic auth. By default, that means they can use OAuth. And then you could essentially, then you'd still have to exclude them from your CA policy though, right? But that would mean they can use OAuth, but not basic.
No, that makes sense. Now, when you exclude them from the policy, can we do that via groups, or is that going to be per user, like add them to us?
Per user, the auth policies are a per user.
Per user, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, perfect.
Okay,
appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, of course. All right. Anyone else? While I just scroll through, or is anyone else? Authentication policies, Cisco Unity. Sorry, what was this? Okay, I think we answered that question. How do we verify apps are using Basic Auth in Azure AD sign-in reports? I think somebody pasted in the answer there. So the Azure AD sign-in reports page, legacy authentication clients. I'll add one thing to that answer. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, or I certainly had a conversation with a customer yesterday about it. If you use certificate-based auth for ActiveSync, it will show up under legacy auth clients Exchange ActiveSync. Now, and that's because Azure consider, whether it's basic auth credentials or certificate-based auth, they consider them both to be air quotes legacy because they're not using OAuth, right? So, it can be a moderately confusing, which is like I'm switching people from ActiveSync with basic auth creds to ActiveSync with certificate, and yet they still show up in legacy auth clients. That's to be expected, and it's nothing to worry about, because when we block basic auth, we're blocking basic auth, not certificate-based auth. So those certificate-based auth ActiveSync devices will continue to work. Okay. Eric, you get your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, I have some application owners that have switched to OAuth for Exchange Web Services, and everything looks fine. I see them, consuming the app and everything just fine. But I still see every so often, typically once a day, a auto discover request that is registering as Basic Auth, even though these are web clients. And I didn't find anything in documentation that basically said, well, it'll try that by default, and as long as it's enabled, it'll function, but it'll fail over to modern auth if basic fails, or if there's something I need them to do to not have auto discover.
And is this from a homegrown app or or a custom app?
Yeah, this is a custom app that they've written to the MS Graph endpoints. and everything's working other than auto discover.
So it does actually prompt me. We should talk about auto discover a bit as well, right? But my initial sneaking suspicion would be that, you know, the app itself is the app's obviously making the request, right? There's, you know, and I can only speak for our own apps that if we try modern auth because it's enabled, we would not fail back and try another auth type if it fails. Now, of course, that's a client-side logic choice, not a server-side decision. So it's kind of down to the app as to how it tries auto discover and what the algorithm is if it's unsuccessful. So without, you know, pointing fingers, but it's your app, I would sort of look there as to why it's making that request. It seems like that's a code path it's chosen, which is perhaps unexpected.
I found some rudimentary mentions about auto discover, you know, V2 versus V1.
Right.
And I can't find any actual documentation about what code they need to do to change their app.
Right. Well,
do you have anything out there for that that I can point them to?
I thought we did. I don't know if anyone else maybe does have links, but so Auto Discover V2 is essentially an anonymous endpoint for looking up mailbox location, right? And so just coming back to, I was going to say, because Auto Discover V1, which is, you know, plain old XML, authenticated, and it was never considered, air quotes, risky, right, for this, because it doesn't really give you any data. Though, of course, it is also another endpoint which is potentially can be exploited from something like a password spray. Now, once ActiveSync and EWS are off the table with Basic Auth, Auto Discover should be off the table for Basic Auth. And I would recommend everyone use auth policies or the checkbox in the admin center to go and uncheck Auto Discover once ActiveSync and EWS are off, because they need it. And I actually want to start blocking Basic Auth for Auto Discover too. And I'm thinking I'm going to immediately get onto that as soon as we push through the next few weeks. So if Basic Auth for ActiveSync and EWS is off, I'm probably going to roll by and turn off Auto Discover as well. But I think there are some examples, Eric. And if nobody can find any immediately available, then I'd be happy to, you know, we can try and follow up and see if we can figure out what the Auto Discover V2 endpoint they could use instead would be.
Would I expect them to break on October 1st if we don't get them to remediate their code for
no, because we're not because I'm not turning off Basic Auth for Auto Discover right away.
Okay.
Auto Discover is going to keep going, but gotcha. I am going to come back and do it. You heard it here first, right? You know, so I think in reality we obviously have to go do that too. There's no point in leaving that enabled if we've turned off EWS and ActiveSync.
Agreed. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Brian, first non-Eric speaker. Go for it, Brian.
Thank you. So, you know, we've got a message saying if we're not using Basic Auth, it's going to turn off for our tenant.
Yes.
And so we kind of assumed that it was turned off because we thought we weren't using it. Now, I was checking the org setting and modern authentication, and we have that turn on modern authentication checked, and also their check marks, everything is checked under the allow access to basic authentication protocol. Does that mean it's still not turned off, or is it?
Good question, right? And so I'm just going to see if let me might actually dare to try and switch screens and do something a bit radical here with Teams, right? But let me give it a try. So this the question here is about these checkboxes here, right? So here's here's my admin center. This is the OAuth 2 client profile flag enabled switch that I said yesterday I've been turning on. I've turned on for a ridiculously large number of tenants without problems. You know, over the last month. These checkboxes control the default authentication policy for the tenant. So back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, which is if you wanted to create an auth policy to allow known apps to use Basic Auth and then change the default for the organization to block, you could easily do that by coming here and doing this. And then because these are the ones that we're changing in October, then the apps that have a per user assignment would override it. Now, back to your question, right, which is, you got a message center post from us saying we've blocked Basic Auth for you, and you come in here and these are all still checked, right?
Yes.
Well, that's because the way we turn them off is even one layer earlier in the auth stack. So in fact, let me just switch back to my presentation here. In fact, let's just see if we can. Oh, this will probably this is going to really blow things up. The way we block Basic Auth is one step earlier in the authentication chain than even authentication policies. Okay, so in fact, if I will just find this is the picture I have on that slide, and this is my favorite picture on the internet, apart from that one with the elephant. But anyway, right. So client comes in, connects to us. Authentication policies are evaluated here. That's where that checkbox has effect. When I block Basic Auth for your tenant, I do it here, even earlier. And it does not change any of these checkboxes. So if you've had a message center post saying, we've turned off Basic Auth for that protocol, these are probably all still checked. But that doesn't mean we didn't block it. We absolutely did. And if you want to double check, you can look in PowerShell. PowerShell will confirm that we've actually blocked the settings for you. Maybe somebody can pop a link in as to kind of where you look for that. But that basically, hopefully that helps kind of sorry, I'm just going to get Teams going back again with my slide. So the state of those authentication policy checkboxes has nothing to do with whether we've blocked Basic Auth or not in your tenant. I know it's a bit confusing. I do plan on coming back and removing that entire flyout for Modern Auth as well at some point in the future.
Okay, well, thank you.
Clearer?
Yeah, clear as mud. Just a quick. I asked another question about checking for the app, and someone did post about the legacy client, and you commented on that as well. Now, is that from the Azure login? Because I guess maybe I'm in a wrong page because I don't see that option to even check the client app.
Here you go. Back in, so the place to go and look at all of this stuff is in Azure AD sign-in logs.
Yeah.
So I'm back in my own tenant here. I don't think there's really any. This is the demo tenant. I do have some usage, right? So the way you go into the thing that they were doing, so you go sign-in logs, add filters, and pick client app there. And then the client app filter allows you to pick under legacy auth what it is you want to pick. So if you want to pick those, I don't probably have anything in this test tenant. Let's find out. Okay. But that's how then you get your legacy auth or basic auth. Oh, I do. Look, Adele. Adele is using Exchange Web Services. So, right. So let me just, Adele here is using Exchange Web Services. I've also got some IMAP going on. So here's my IMAP user. Okay. Password in the cloud. It was the correct password. And what's interesting here is I just want to call this out is because I'm going to show you user agent on another one. User agent here, right, this is not using the ROPC flow. I get asked that sometimes. This is essentially the way Exchange authenticates to Azure. And actually I'll switch back to this, my favorite picture again. And that's because in this case, Exchange Online proxies the credentials to identity and proxies the credentials to Azure to get tokens. Exchange Online is technically the client as far as Azure is concerned, not this app. In the legacy auth case, the app sends creds to us, and Exchange Online, using ROPC, uses the creds to get tokens on behalf of the user. If this email client were a Modern Auth client, it would talk directly to Azure, and then it would come back to Exchange. But in Azure, you would see the app identity, not Exchange's identity. So that explains why, in this case, the application being used here is Exchange Online, because the client is Exchange Online from Azure's perspective. The reason I call out the user agent string is if I look at Adele here, Adele Oh, she has a user agent of Cloud Magic. That's because she has an app for email running on an Android device sitting on my desk. So that Android device is using Exchange Web Services and sent us the user agent Cloud Magic. I've got another one here as well. This is probably the same user. Yeah, it is. Okay. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
That's where you go look.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, sorry. Okay, what other questions have we got? Anyone else want to shout quickly? Ray, go for it.
Actually, I just posted my entire question in chat because it's long.
Oh, really? Do you want to paraphrase it for me, or do you want me to
All right,
sit quietly and we can all read it?
We are looking at, and I'm looking at it right now, the August report for Basic Auth that we get in Message Center,
Okay,
and that's that screenshots there is what it's reporting. We run the reports. We're not seeing the 441 active sync users. We're not seeing, well, the POP users I'm seeing because there's 2 of my apps.
Okay.
And we do have one doing EWS that's not getting reported there, I don't believe. And but we're not seeing the active sync ones in our reporting. Right. So I'm going to run a report again today to validate that.
Sure.
I'm not the only one running reports. We have like 6 people running them on a weekly basis.
Okay, so let me quickly touch on that, right? So here's why. And I go back to, I'm afraid, my damn picture again, everyone, okay? The data we use to generate the Message Center post comes from here. The data you look at in Azure comes from here. Now, why are they different? Well, think of the IMAP example that we talked about earlier, right? Client connects, client authenticates, client passes conditional access, client is blocked by setcas mailbox. Azure would not know that. Azure would see that as a completely successful logon. Exchange would show it as a successful logon, but a failure to authenticate or authorize. Sorry, authorization failure. Now, the data we send you in your message center comes from this source, and it's an indicator. As in fact, the message center post, that is a little sentence or two under that table of user numbers of how many users we saw, which kind of covers us a bit, because it's not an exact science for this reason, because Exchange seeing successful authentication does not equal completely end-to-end access to something, which is why you need to use Azure AD reports to get that additional level of detail to understand. Now, we also, so your active sync 441 in your case, we typically see, this is how many unique users we saw logging in the course of that month. Now, it could have been 29 days ago and a whole bunch of them stopped using it. We'll still count them. So sometimes a 30-day window is too great, particularly if you're working on driving the numbers down. And so, but in that month, we saw 441 successful logins. Now, if you don't think that's the case, feel free to hit me up. I'll show you the data. And I promise you, they logged in. They maybe got denied because of some conditional access policy or something else you had down the line, but they definitely sent us their creds and were successfully authenticated.
Okay, because we do have a conditional access policy that blocks all basic auth unless they're in the exclusion list, which is like 6, like I said, 6 accounts that are the only ones left.
Right. So just creating a conditional access policy doesn't stop them from sending us their credentials because they're set up on the device.
Right.
So if you're confident they're all blocked, then you can ignore them. Better yet, though, given that their credentials are on their devices, better yet, you could either set up an auth policy, and then essentially you would just, throw them an error at the point of connection, and maybe they'll get bored of seeing the error on their phone, and they'll eventually delete the account. Because right now, if you think about it, your users' credentials are sitting on the device.
Correct.
So you may want those users to change their passwords or do something, but you understand why. It's probably then conditional access is blocking them, but the devices are still configured to send us their creds. Yeah,
and we literally had a list of 1,800 exclusions when we started this about 6 months ago. We're down to 6. We have actually manually went through every user's iPhone, because all these were iPhones. We don't allow.
Right.
If they have a different phone, we don't support it. So if it breaks, we don't care. That's pretty crass, I understand, but we don't care.
Right.
but we have manually went through and deleted accounts, walked the users through deleted accounts, sent them instructions on deleting their account and recreating it using modern auth. So we should be good moving forward on October 1st. I think we're going to send out a blurb and an email, or at least on our announcement page. So they'll, by the way, if your device was working on October 1st, here's the instructions on how to recreate the account.
Right. And you know, it is going to be rough on some users for sure, but if they have, IT pros like this kind of audience, I mean, it's our job to try and help smoothly transition them, right? The ones that honestly, share that cause me a bit of angst are all the small businesses that don't have smart people like, you lot who can help them. And email's going to stop working.
Yeah.
So
and we had one app that basically said, "Oh, why is IU Health blocking Basic Auth?" I said, "Excuse me, but no, this is a global thing that Microsoft's doing. It's not just us."
You can blame me.
And I'm like, then go back to your developer for the app, because if they don't change it, you're going to quit working.
Yeah.
So.
And blame us, blame me. I'm fine with that. But I think we all there's not a customer I've spoken to in the last 3 years that has not agreed this is a good thing to do.
Oh, I'm happy to.
Everyone agrees. The challenge we all have is the impact on users, the impact on apps, and how hard it can be to make, particularly in large orgs, to make change. Right. So, that's the battle we all have, and that's what we all do. And I appreciate the help, everyone here puts into it as well. I mean, we're collectively trying to raise the bar for security and protect their data and the accounts and all of that good stuff. So,
yeah, our two big problems were Unity, which we're still working with, trying to get the guys to get that done. And WriteFax was the other big one we had.
Right. And there are a number of apps that I see pretty regularly crop up. And most of them, there are solutions to them. Some are problematic, right? The custom apps, it comes down to what I was saying earlier. And I know we're at time here, folks. We'll wrap up in just a tick here. But, if you own, and typically when I sort of talk to a customer about third-party EWS apps, custom EWS apps, the thought process is this an app you've built, you have the source code for and can modify, or is this from a third party? And if it's from a third party, do they have an option? Maybe the software you've already got installed can be reconfigured. Maybe it already supports OAuth. Or do you need a version upgrade? Or do they not even know this is coming, and then now they need to write you a new version? And so, that thought process is applicable to an EWS-based app or a POP or an IMAP-based app or whatever. Most of the mobile stuff and Outlook connectivity, all of the apps support it. You just got to either reconfigure them, get on the right version, deploy the registry changes, those kind of things. It's these custom apps that I think are going to catch people out, and hence why we have part of the program is to re-enable for 3 months. And, I know it's 3 months heading into the holiday season in certain parts of the world, but that's the opportunity people have. I think we're at time here. I really appreciate any last minute questions. Feel free to pop them in chat, and I'll answer them even after we drop. But let me say thanks everyone for joining. It was kind of fun. It was a bit of a me show today, so sorry Rob and Nino and some other really smart folks who were here. Me could have answered questions, but me, I like the sound of my own voice, so didn't give you an opportunity. So I'm sorry about that. And thanks to all
we like hearing it too.
Thanks to all the Erics who asked questions as well. Huge representation from the Erics, so good work there. All right, Corey, you got one last question? Should we, and then we'll wrap up, or should we pop it in chat? Is it a long question or is it a quick one? No, Corey's putting his hand up and just saying, all right, okay. Let's call it one there. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope you enjoy the rest of MEC. There's some great sessions and great speakers. So go listen, ask some really hard questions. They do enjoy being put on the spot. And feel free to drop anything in chat here if you have a follow-up question we didn't get to, and I'll do my best to answer. And once more, thanks for helping get all these customers safe and secure. It is a team effort. We're all in this together. So I really do appreciate the support, help that you're all providing.
And Greg, this is going to be saved into this Teams chat, this whole session, right?
I'm I don't know. That's yeah, Linda. I think so. This chat will stay here, I guess, for some period of time. But go grab whatever you want from it if you please.
For a little bit.
Cool. There you go.
Sure. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Mac. Have a great day.